I'm Elvina Estrella Sambuaga. As a student of doctoral program in accounting, warmly welcoming all participants in this workshop. Ladies and gentlemen, coming to the next session, I would like to invite Ibu Yulianti PhD as the head of accounting department to opening speech in this workshop. Please welcome Ibu Yulianti.
Should I do this? Should I just put it here? Doesn't work. Okay, good morning, students and participants to the PPIA workshop, Bincang Akademi PPIA today. So thank you for the participants who are here. And we're still waiting for more people to come here and can meet like Pak Ali in person. But you know, if you cannot come to campus today, that's also fine to follow the workshop online. So thank you again, Pak Ali, for being here. So for those of you who are our alumni, you probably know that Pak has been our guest speaker for, I think, since 2018, right, Pak so welcome back, and I saw some names that were in your class in 2018, and you basically can say hi, and maybe if you have things that you want to ask, like some of them already become a lecturer now. Okay, so it's been quite a while, right? It's been like 4 years. So our workshop today titled the Building Theoretical and Practical Contributions, Insights from Auditing and Information System Research. So I think those of you who conduct research know that contribution is something that's really important in your research, and you cannot pass your exam without proving that you contribute something to the literature, right? So Paddy will be like the best person to talk about this topic because, as you know, he already published in so many different high, top tier accounting journals, and also served as editor and reviewer in so many different accounting journals. So please make use of the workshop today to maybe ask questions, or maybe if you want some opinion, advice from Paddy, this will be a good chance for you. Without further ado, so I will give the floor back to our pretty MC Elvina. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Yuli. Ladies and gentlemen, next session is speech that will be delivered by Ibu Desi Adaryani PhD as the head of postgraduate accounting study program. Please welcome Ibu Desi.
Okay, thank you, Elvina, our moderator. I hope that you all can hear my voice clearly. Yeah. Thank you, Ibu Yuli, our Director of Department of Accounting, and of course, Prof. Adi Masli as our honorable speaker for today. Yeah. Before we continue with the main agenda, which will be delivered by Prof. Adi Masli, I just would like to introduce you to our program. So maybe that in the future, any students or maybe the future lecturers can join us in postgraduate program in accounting, Faculty of Economics and Business, UI. Yeah. Okay, let me share the slide first. This is just the introduction PowerPoint ya. Tak kenal maka tak paham ya. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, thank you, Bu Yuli. Okay, for those of you who are our students, then I assume that you must already know the PPIA. So this is just the introduction for maybe our future students or who might be interested to join our program. Okay, so in our program, this is basically a research-based program. So we have two master or magister program in UI, yeah, related with accounting. We have Magister of Accounting in Salemba, and this is the Magister of Science in Accounting in Depok. So Magister of Science in Accounting is for the graduate program, yeah, S2, and we also have the doctoral program or postgraduate program. Jadi ada S2 dan S3 ya. So as you can see that we learn accounting knowledge, but we are also equipped with research skill and contribution to science. So that's why we think that the speech that will be, the materials that will be delivered by Prof. Adi will really help us to think about what is our really contribution to science, yeah, contribution to literature, contribution, theoretical contribution, and also practical contribution. Because the research nowadays, we are also expected to have the toward impact research. So it is not only the contribution to theory or literature, but also contribution to society or the practical contribution. Okay, and for in this program, so of course we have several courses which is related to research, and the students are expected to do independent research, thesis and dissertation, and we also equip the students and lecturer with training, workshops, just like what we do today. And to improve communication skill, we also give the students the chance or opportunities to present, yeah, and also to build network and collaboration, national and international. Okay. And then for the curriculum, so we blend the science program, yeah, scientific program, and also research method. And as you can see here, of course, we will not go one by one for the courses. Yeah, so basically, we will learn about the theory and also the research issues. Yeah, either in management accounting or financial accounting, auditing, and so on. Yeah. Okay, and there are also electives in the master program that you can take from the governance, sustainability. So we cover several hot topics, yeah, and also public finance, public sector, Sharia, and this is the last one. Is I believe this is the expertise of Prof. Adi, yeah, accounting, information system, risk and controls, and also auditing. Okay, and then for our doctoral degree, we also have several courses blended blended with research and also science. And for doctoral degree, we expect that students can publish internationally, yeah? So not only national but also international research publication, so that we can reach broader audience and we can have contribution to science largely, yeah? Not only in national but also international. Okay, again, these are the electives for doctoral program that cover hot topics in research and also in the real world phenomenon. Okay, and then yeah, this is the publication requirement for program, for magister program, yeah, at least or minimum publication in national journal, while doctoral program in international journal. Okay, so to support the research and also the courses, so we have several training workshops, and also yeah, you can see several photo here, yeah, general lecturers. This is from Prof. Adi in 2020, and now we meet Prof. Adi again in 2022, yeah. Okay, and then we also have research sharing, symposium, colloquium, yeah. Okay, and also especially for text, for those of you who are text lovers, yeah, we also have the text research sharing, yeah, in collaboration with LPM UI. Okay, yeah, this is the promotion of doctoral program and thesis, yeah. And also we have the regular activities, forum riset akuntansi. So in this forum, the students can present their ongoing research to get the feedback from lecturers, yeah, or from researchers. And we also have the konsultasi econometry, yeah, that students can consult the problems or ask any problems about statistics or econometry. And we also have weekly writing buddy and publication clinics for our students. Please do come for the writing buddy and publication clinics, because this is also important as your friend or your colleague for writing activities. So basically in writing buddy and publication clinics, we will discuss about writing issues. Yeah, maybe it is not very substance, because the substance of course must be discussed with your supervisors. Yeah? So we will also talk about the tips for publication. Okay, so that's the program courses, and also the support to support the courses in PPIA. And we also have several support here from library, computer lab, yeah. And last thing, make the most of your time at PPIA FEBUI. Okay, thank you very much. So I hope that this brief presentation can give you a brief introduction for our program. Okay, thank you. And yeah, Elvina. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Desi. Ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the next session. That is about building theoretical and practical contributions, insight from auditing and information system research, that will be delivered by Professor Adi Matli as a speaker of Accounting Department, Kansas University, USA. So for ladies and gentlemen, before we are going to listen the material from Prof. Adi, allow me to read the brief profile of our beloved speaker, Professor Adi Masli. Professor Adi Masli is graduate from Accounting Department, Wharton College of Business, University of Kansas, for bachelor, master, and PhD degree, ya, Prof. In 2011, he became assistant professor at University of Kansas, and then 2017, he became associate professor at the same university, and recently, Professor Adi Masli got his full professor in accounting in 2022, yeah, Prof. Okay, congratulations, Prof. Okay, Professor Adi Masli also has got some rewards in any respect. They are Brigham Young University auto ranking for both name topics and name methods, KOCH Fellowship University of Kansas, PwC Inquiries Funding Program, the EY Center for Auditing Research and Advanced Technology, and also Competitive Summer Research Funding. Oh, there is so many, yeah, Prof. I'm so glad to be here once more. Okay, Professor Adi Masli also active in professional service such as American Accounting Association, wow, AAA, and also reviewer for several academic journals, as we already know, like the Accounting Review, MIS Quarterly, Information System Research, Auditing, a Journal of Practice and Theory, Accounting Horizon, Journal of Information System, and International Journal of Accounting Information System. Wow, this is such a great CV, Prof. So, ladies and gentlemen, with great respect, let us invite our beloved speakers together. Professor Adi Masli, please welcome, Prof. And
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Everyone in Zoom land, can you hear me okay? Or more importantly, can you see the slides okay?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning again. I would like to thank you, Budesi. I really appreciate the opportunity to come today and have the opportunity to have a discussion with your wonderful students at UI. I really appreciate it. Um, so, and obviously, dear students who are here today, is this better? Yes. Okay. Obviously, dear students of PPIA, master students and doctoral students, really wonderful to be able to see you and meet with you, because I truly believe that you are the future of research in Indonesia. Right? You have a big responsibility because you will carry forward the research mission of our country. So it's wonderful to see you. Today, or this morning, I would like to talk about building theoretical and practical contributions of your research. And at the end, I welcome your comments and questions so we can have a productive discussion so that you can further enhance your research moving forward. So, as mentioned, I am a professor and Koch Fellow at the University of Kansas. I'd like to share with you a bit about my background and also a little bit about my university. I apologize for those of you who attended yesterday. You probably have gone through this. As mentioned, I got my degree in University of Arkansas in the Sam Walton College of Business. Undergraduate in Accounting and Information System in 2005, Master's in Accounting in 2006, and PhD in 2011. So I went to school for 10 years or 11 years straight. I don't think I could do that again. But at the time, I graduated my undergraduate, master's, and then, I was still a poor student. I didn't have a job, regular job, so I went straight to the PhD program, which I think in the US is quite unique because in the US, our PhD students come from industry most of the time. But I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to be a lecturer because of my father. My father is also an accounting professor in Indonesia. He was a dean of a private university in Jogja and also teaches at Gajah Mada University. So he went to the US to obtain his master's and PhD program or degree in the early 90s. So I wanted to, be a professor. So I went straight to the PhD program. So after I graduated from my PhD in University of Arkansas, I was recruited to be an assistant professor at the University of Kansas. So in the US, it's a bit different than in Indonesia. In Indonesia, you have many strata of titles, right? I believe, right? You have in the government. In the US, there's only 3 levels, basically. Once you join faculty, is assistant professor, and then if you make tenure, you become associate professor. So I became associate professor in 2016, and then just earlier this year to be full professor at the University of Kansas. Here's some pictures of the University of Kansas, but these are pictures before the pandemic, so I don't know what it looks like now. Hopefully the same. This is our business school, and as I mentioned yesterday, in the US, for universities, sports is a very big deal, right? So sports is the #1 revenue generator for universities. And I'm happy to report that our university, we won the national championship for basketball this year. So this will certainly help with enrollment, I think, moving forward. And, at the University of Kansas, I think we're doing some really good things in our faculty, especially in our accounting faculty. If you look at the accounting rankings for research globally, so Brigham Young University, or BYU, they have this ranking system of accounting research productivity globally. So if you look at all research, University of Kansas in the last 12 years is ranked number 15 in the world, and we're hoping to continue to improve that. But if you only look at auditing research, which is what we specialize in at Kansas, at the last 12 years, we're ranked number 1 in terms of auditing research. So we're hoping to continue this progress. Okay, so we're all researchers, right, in this room and in Zoom. We're not only doing research just to graduate, because we are going to do research for the rest of our lives, right? It's going to become a part of our, or has been part of our daily lives, right? I just want to share some thoughts. So in research and publishing, there are things that we cannot control, and there are things that we can control. We can't control the review process, for example, right? We cannot control who will review our manuscript, right? We cannot control the mood that the reviewer will be in when he or she reads our manuscript, right? After all, when we submit our manuscript or our paper to a journal, we're not submitting to an artificial intelligence or machine that will objectively evaluate our manuscript, right? We are submitting to human beings that have different subjective beliefs, biases, and thoughts, right? So there are many things that we cannot control. And this is where the frustration can lie in researching and trying to publish our work, right? We cannot control competition, right? In research, we're competing not against researchers in Indonesia, we're competing against researchers all over the world, globally. So we cannot control if, for example, we have an idea and then suddenly in 1 month we find out there's a competing paper, for example, right? We cannot control that. But there are things that we can control, and that's what I would like to talk about today. We can control, the quality of our work. We can control the timeliness of our research, the speed at which we work. We can control, the research idea generation that we want, right? Nobody can tell us what to research, right? It's based on your inspiration, what you are interested in, your curiosity, right? So there are things that we can control. So what I tell my PhD students at Kansas is, do not worry about things that we cannot control. We only worry about things we can control, right? And that's the focus of my discussion today, especially as it relates to building contribution in our research. So just a little bit about the global research landscape, and here it's mostly about accounting research. Not much has really changed in terms of which country is the most productive in publishing accounting research. In 1996, the top 3 countries of accounting research productivity were United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. In 2017, the same 3 countries. Also United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. So over 20 years, in terms of accounting research productivity, if we look at the top countries, not much has really changed, right? But really good news is that Indonesia is improving its accounting research productivity. In 2000, Indonesia was ranked number 41 globally in terms of accounting research productivity. In 2015, it had the same ranking of 41, but the next year, in 2016, it jumped to number 33. And in 2020, Indonesia is ranked number 12, right? So it is your job, everyone here in this room and everyone in Zoom, if you're doing accounting research, to continue pushing this, improving the ranking of accounting research productivity of Indonesia. And I have all the confidence in the world that you will be able to do it, because I think we are continuously improving, research standards, productivity, and the like, right? So there's positive momentum. There's very positive momentum for us. Okay. So rejections by journals happen to everyone, right? Especially at the top journals. It does not matter who you are. You could be a PhD student, you could be a full professor, you could be a world-renowned professor, you can be at the top universities. At some point, rejections happen to everybody, right? So, it's kind of being expected that you will be rejected. It's kind of a normal, it's actually a surprise, a nice surprise if you have a revise and resubmit. So my message to you is rejection is normal, right? Do not become overly frustrated, right, when you get rejection. But when you get small victories, celebrate those, right? Because in our career, we're going to have far more rejections than successes, right? So it's important that when you have, a revised resubmit, or if you finish your dissertation, or you get good results, right? Or you finish a section of your paper, it's important to celebrate those. So in my talk today, I'm going to talk about rejection, and I'm going to talk about the main reasons for journal rejection, but more importantly, how we can improve our chances of journal success. Okay. So it's important that even though, rejection, if you look at the top accounting journal, rejection rate is about 90 to 95%. So only 5% of submissions to the top accounting journals get accepted. Now that's the top tier journals, but if you look at the second tier or the next level journal, the rejection rate is not as high as 95%, but it's also high. It's also like 80% or 85%, right? But my message for you is not to be discouraged or to give up, because if you look at this graph, this shows the number of journals that are in operation from 1886 to 2020, over 100 years. If you look at the green line on your screen, in 1960s, the number of accounting journals that you can submit is less than 5 back then. Now we have more than almost 30 accounting journals, or 30 reputable accounting journals, I must say, that are in operations today. So my message is that there are more journals that we have opportunity to submit our work, right, compared to years past, right? At least we have this, right? We have more journals. If you look at Scopus, for example, the number of journals that are listed in Scopus is growing every year, right? In almost every discipline. And I don't see that stopping. There's going to be more reputable journals that are going to be in existence going forward. So what I would like to start or go next is, let's talk about the evolution of a research paper, and let's think about what we need to think about at every step of this process. Okay. So when we have a research paper, whether it's a dissertation or it's another research paper that you are working on, we start with the idea generation. This is where the excitement begins, right? When we finally find a research idea that we are passionate in, a research idea that we really want to know the answer to, right? A research idea that we wake up every day excited to work on. But my message for you or for us is in this stage, maybe we don't rush it, right? Sometimes when we come up with a research idea and we have data, for example, we start right away. But just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should, right? So I also have this mistake where sometimes we do not think carefully enough of whether this idea has enough contribution, whether this idea is something that a lot of people will care about, whether this idea is too narrow in scope, right? So my message is that let's do more due diligence up front in the beginning and really think about, is this idea something worth pursuing? Because when you start a research paper, it's a big investment, right? It can take multiple years of your life. It can take countless hours. I have in my career have had ideas that I've started and later on I regret because it turns out that it was not such a good idea and I rushed it. And I wasn't able to publish it, right? So that's sunk costs. Right? So in the idea generation, well, how do we know? Well, when we come up with a research idea, take advantage of the people around you, right? You're surrounded by intellectuals, you're surrounded by professors, you're surrounded by fellow academics. So I think it's fair to get feedback or comments or thoughts about what your ideas are, right? So it's important to invest early on in the process about really thinking about this research idea. And just because you have data does not mean that you need to start the research necessarily. Okay. The next stage of the research paper is here I have recruiting a research team. Now this will be different for you who are starting a dissertation because it's just by yourself. But later on, when you are a lecturer and you're starting research projects, think about building research teams or building a network of researchers that you can work with. So because in research is not an individual effort or project or enterprise. Research is a team sport, right? So in my case, when I recruit a research team, I normally like to recruit people at different stages. So sometimes I would recruit someone that's a PhD student, someone that is an assistant professor, and maybe somebody that's a full professor, right? Or I may recruit a research team where everybody have different strengths, where somebody is really good at data analysis, somebody that's really good at writing, somebody that's really good at editing or strategy, So my message to you is that, after you finish your dissertation or if you work on other research, think about how can you build your own network of research. So in my case, over the last 12 years, I have worked with more than 50 people, 50 researchers. And most of them are not at Kansas. Most of them are at other universities that I have been able to connect with at AAA conferences, visiting them at workshops, or just emailing them. And then, so think about building your network. And you start with maybe your fellow students in your program, obviously your mentors, your professors, your advisors. Because again, research is a team sport, right? Okay, generating the research paper in this process, this is the longest process, right? It can take multiple years. So when we have a research team, like in my case, what I would do is I would divide different tasks to different people, and then we divide and conquer, so to speak, right? So after the research paper is generated, what do we do? Once the paper is done, what do you usually do? You usually think about journal submission, right? But I think there's an important step that a lot of people, a lot of researchers forget or don't invest enough time, is this step about obtaining feedback and comments. So before I submit to a journal, I normally take some time to obtain feedback and comments about the paper. Who do I get feedback and comments from? Well, I would get it from, my peers or colleagues at Kansas, for example. I would ask people that I know, fellow researchers that I know from other universities. And usually I don't ask them to read the whole paper, right? I would simply ask them to read the introduction, for example, and ask them for their honest, candid feedback about what they think, right? We can also obtain feedback and comments from workshops at other universities or conferences. But I think this step is a step that maybe a lot of people do not invest enough in, right? So I would get feedback and comments from maybe, 3, 4, or 5. Maybe that's enough, right? And I would learn from their feedback to know, okay, is this journal ready? Is this ready for a journal? What are some things that I can do to improve? But there are some feedback that I can't do, for example, that are outside the scope. But this is an important step. Now, because you're in the doctoral program, maybe you don't have enough time because you have to, graduate and submit. But when you are a lecturer and a researcher, think about investing more time in obtaining feedback and suggestions from peers. And then submitting to an academic journal, right? Which journal do you submit to, right? It depends, right? You can go for the very top, the top tier. Or if you are pressed for time, you can strategically select certain journals that fit the topic of your research, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about journal submission and things like that in a moment. But what I would like to talk about next is the next step is after you submit, more than likely, after you submit to your very first journal, let's say it's a top tier journal, unfortunately, you're going to get rejected, right? So let's talk about how to handle and learn from rejection. This is a topic that I think, Budesi, you asked something about yesterday about how to handle rejection and respond to rejection. So when we get our rejection, my message is, maybe we take a couple days being frustrated or sad or angry, right? But do not take more than 2 or 3 days, right? Because after that, usually, most cases, we can learn from the rejections that we get, right? We can learn from the rejections that we get to improve our chances at the next journal, right? And we talked about how yesterday, sometimes, in some instances, the reviewer that we get in our first submission is the same reviewer that we get in the next submission. So if we do not change our paper or improve our paper based on the comments that we receive, and we get the same reviewer in the next journal, we're in trouble, right? So when we get our rejections, it's not realistic. It is not realistic that we are able to address every single comment that we get from the reviewer that rejected our paper. After all, if we get rejected, the reviewer hates our paper, right? But let's try to see what comments we can address and what comments we cannot address. Okay. So usually when I get a rejection letter from a journal, I categorize comments that are minor and major, and I usually try to implement the minor comments first because they're usually related to writing issues or clarification issues, maybe some grammar grammar issues. So usually if there are some minor issues or minor comments, we can fix, right? Major comments, you can then categorize them into empirical or data related issues or whether they're writing issues. Usually if they're writing issues, we can work to handle those, right? But let's say you get some comments about data or empirics that maybe you cannot do because you do not have the data, or maybe it's outside the scope and you need to work on it fast, right? Then what you can do is you can still think about maybe you can write something in your limitation section or area of future research that you can help address. My point being is that when you get a rejection, do not throw them away and forget about it. Try to learn as much as you can from these rejection points. Does that make sense? So then you go to your next journal and you finally get a revise and resubmit, right? So this is good news. You finally have an opportunity to revise your work and then resubmit and get further consideration. Now, let's talk about how we handle revise and resubmit, right? Because there's also a strategy in this. Because, revise and resubmit is not a guarantee, right? I think, I do not know the statistics, but I would bet that more than half or maybe half of the revise and resubmits fail, right? So when we have a revise and resubmit, it's very important that we are, we engage in due diligence, we take every comment seriously, and we handle the response effectively. Okay, so let's talk about revise and resubmit. Treat reviewers as friends and not enemies, right? Think about reviewers as, and I know it's hard to do because when you see reviewers, first of all, it's anonymous, so you don't know who they are. So you cannot email them and say, hey, you're wrong, you were wrong about this, you were wrong about that. You can't really get angry at them. I know that reviewers sometimes have comments that you do not agree with, that you think are that were poorly made. But it's good for our own psychological disposition. It's good for our own mindset to treat reviewers as friends, as somebody that is trying to help you improve the quality and the contribution of your work, right? At least it's good for our own mindset to do this. So when you have a revise and resubmit, you have to respond to reviewer comments and you have to, produce a response memo, right? So these are some best practices that I have learned, right? So these are best practices in terms of how do we handle the response memo, right? Because we have to write our responses to every single comment, right? Number one, polite and thankful. Be polite and thankful. I know this is hard to do because I know some reviewer comments make you angry, right, that you don't agree with. But I think the tone of the response memo is super important, that you demonstrate, you're thankful for the comment or the feedback of the reviewers, no matter what it is, and you have a more positive or polite tone in your response, right? Number two, the second point that I would like to make is every comment or suggestion matters. No matter how minor or small you think it is, treat every comment seriously, right? And respond to every comment as if they're all important, right? So if you treat every comment seriously, because sometimes for the reviewer, you think it's minor, but for him or her, it's a big deal, right? So you don't want to take that risk. You don't want to take that risk that you ignore some minor comments that he or she may think is important, right? And the third point I would like to make here is that be comprehensive in our responses for all comments, no matter how big or small, right? So usually in my response memo, I try to give as much detailed explanation as I can for every single comment to make sure that I address every single aspect of the comment, right? So, these may seem common sense to you, but you would be surprised how many response memo I see that do not follow these three, right? So I have seen response memo that I can tell that they're trying to rush it, right? And they don't treat every comment to being important. So they only say 1 or 2 sentences in response. And usually that just annoys the reviewer, right? So, here it's tone, every comment matters, and, try to be as comprehensive as we can in our response. So when we have a response memo, here is an example of my response memo, and this is just the opening paragraph. Okay, this is before I go into the details of the comment. So this is an example of an opening paragraph. So as a general response, thank you very much for insightful comments and suggestions. We appreciate and understand your concerns. We appreciate all of your comments and suggestions and work diligently to address them. We completely overhauled the manuscript by incorporating your suggestions to enhance the scope. We believe the manuscript is much improved, etc. Right? So I will share my slides with you. You can use this maybe as a template. Maybe you don't think this is necessary, right? But in my case, I always have an opening paragraph just to show my gratitude that the reviewer has taken time and effort, right, to read and give us comments, right? So this sets a positive tone. So we want the reviewer, when they read our response memo, to be in a good mood, right, when they read our responses. So the next point I would like to make or offer is that I believe that every good paper can find a journal home, but we do not always get our dream home, right? We all want the top tier hits, right? We all want the Q1s of Scopus, right? But if you look at my CV, not everything is in Q1, not everything is top tier, because in most cases, I try for the top tier, but then it doesn't work out. I improve based on rejection. I go to the next journal, the next journal, the next journal, right? My point is, just because your paper is in a lower tier journal, maybe not top tier, it does not mean that it's not going to get cited as much. For example, in my case, some of my papers that are in second tier are cited more often than papers in the top tier, right? Now, there are some universities in the US, for example, that only count the top 5 journals, for example, right? But that's only a very select number of universities. For example, in Kansas, we do have different tiers of journals, but, at my university, we do count, a lot of different journals at different points, right? So, when we submit, we want to try to find a journal that looks like this, home, right? But, if we can't, we go to the next step. then we go to the next step, right? The worst case scenario is you have a research paper that you do not submit anywhere, that you just drop, right? That's the worst case. So my point is, there's more journals out there that we can try. It's important to, not to give up too quickly on a research paper. So in Scopus, we have Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Where do you go? Which journal do you go? Now, this is the thing. Obviously, we all want to try for Q1. But often, we have to be honest with ourselves. Maybe after getting comments and feedback, maybe after getting comments from conferences, we have to be honest that maybe our paper doesn't fit Q1, and then we have to go to either Q2 or Q3, right? Sometimes, we have to be honest with ourselves. Not every paper is destined for Q1, right? So we have to be kind of realistic sometimes. Sometimes we have to be our own toughest critic, right? But that's okay, right? Because I think there are a lot of opportunities that we can, try to submit to reputable, well-regarded journals for our work, But here's another, be aware of predatory journals, right? So this is a phenomenon that is ongoing. These are predatory journals, meaning journals that are not peer-reviewed, that they usually ask for, a really big submission fee, right? And they do not give you any review comments, right? So there are predatory journals out there that we need to be aware of, because obviously we want to have our work in good journals that can matter, right? So be aware of predatory journals. So for example, so this is from the American College of Sport Medicine. These are some signs that a journal may be predatory. So it says that many are open access and require fees, and usually the fees are super, super high, right? Even higher than fees that are at the top tier journals. Quality is of substantial concern. Poor or no editing and poor or no peer review. Unethical business practices such as offering services not as advertised, making false claims, etc. So we need to be careful. We need to be careful that we do not, submit our work to these types of journals. Practically speaking, if you go to a website like this is the Beall's list. So Beall is a professor at the University of Colorado in US, and he compiles a list of all of the predatory journals out there. So if you go to this website, you can access a list of journals that are considered kind of predatory that you can avoid. There is also this website called openaccessjournal.com. So here, if you go to the website, it creates a list, and by alphabetical from A to Z, this has a pretty good list of all of the predatory journals. For example, here are all the journals starting with A that are considered predatory. So when you select the journal that you want to submit your work, just be aware of this, right? Okay. So very quickly, why do we conduct our research? This is something I think about almost every day, right? Why do we do this? Why is it worth doing? Right? I know for you that are in the graduate program, you need to do research to graduate, right? But think deeply, why do we conduct research? So I like to think of it as I have idealistic reason, I have realistic reason. Idealistically, I like to think that my research can matter, right? I like to think that I'm contributing to, some body of knowledge. I can potentially help some business stakeholder to solve business problem. I would like to think that I'm helping future researchers conduct research, right? I think it's important for every one of us to have an idealistic reason, because that can keep us motivated, right? But we also have realistic reason, right? We need to graduate, to get promoted, to get salary promotions, all of this, right? So I think we need to have both idealistic and realistic, and we have to balance them, and both are important. Consider this quote by Stephen Hawking, who is obviously, as you know, a world-renowned physicist, that no one undertakes research with the intention of winning a prize. It is the joy of discovering something no one knew before. So maybe we do research just because we want to find out new knowledge, right? It excites us when we discover something new that nobody else has discovered before. It excites us when we're able to contribute something to the academic community, right? I think that's important, right? Because in this research game, we are going to get frustrated. We're going to get rejected. But if we always go back to why do we do research, I think we can find a source of inspiration, a source of motivation. So my insights about research, unfortunately, the low-hanging fruits are largely gone, right? And here I'm talking about accounting, but it applies to almost all disciplines. If you look at accounting research has existed since the 1920s. The first issue of Accounting Review was published in the 1920s, I think. So there has been a lot of research. So the low-hanging fruits are gone. If you look at an apple tree, the fruits on the ground or the low-hanging fruits have all been picked, meaning all of the basic research ideas have been done, right? All of the basic research questions, the basic research ideas, however you define basic, has been answered. So at the same time, it's easier for us to do research right now because we have technology, we have computer power, we have database resources, right? We have it's easier and fast. We have Google Scholar, right, to access all the papers we want. It's faster for us to do research, but at the same time, it's harder for us to do research now because the low-hanging fruits are gone. Now it's a competition of ideas, not competition of data, not competition of computing power. We have to rely on our originality, creativity, right? Not only the low-hanging fruit, as you see here, even the middle fruits are almost gone, right? So if you look at this, I want to just make this point that if you look at these accounting outcomes, these are not all, but these are most of the accounting outcomes that we care about. Financial reporting quality, conservatism, voluntary disclosure, mandatory disclosure, auditor selection, audit equality, executive pay, internal control, tax avoidance, etc. Right? We know the outcomes that accounting researchers care about. Unfortunately, a lot of research has been done, so we know most of the factors that affect us. Right? So the low-hanging fruits are gone. We need to think about, well, how do we contribute? How can we make a contribution? So the first thing that we need to think about is our research idea, right? How do we come up with a research idea? What inspires us? What's a research idea that can create interest, that is original, that is going to create a contribution? What are sources of inspiration that creates research ideas? So I'm also anxious to learn from you, to want to know, where do you get your research ideas? But let me share with you some avenues of where we can get inspiring, original, interesting research ideas. Okay. Reading academic journals. We all do this, right? But what we do mostly is the yellow box inside. So we all read the academic literature in our topic, right? We do this, we need to do this, right? But what I would encourage you to do, and this is what I do also, is read academic work outside of your topic, outside of your discipline, outside of your comfort zone. You would be surprised how many ideas you can get when you read literature or papers outside, because I think in the future, innovative papers will be the ones that can combine multiple disciplines. I myself have found some good luck doing that, where I combine accounting and management, for example, accounting and information system, accounting and marketing topics, ideas, things like that, accounting and finance, right? So I have found some good luck being able to combine multiple areas of research, and I think that's where source of innovation can be in the future. So spend some time, reading papers outside of accounting if you're an accounting researcher, or let's say you're accounting in auditing research. Read other accounting papers outside of auditing, right? Broaden your horizon. You'll be surprised how many really good ideas, creative ideas you can get simply by reading things outside of your comfort topic. If that makes sense, right? The next thing I would suggest is browse through research synthesis or literature review papers. So, for example, if you go to this journal, the Journal of Accounting Literature, this journal publishes research synthesis or literature reviews, right? So when you read research synthesis, literature review, it's good because you know everything that's been done in that area. But in most cases, the good thing about research synthesis is at the very end, or not the very end, at the end of the paper, usually the authors would also talk about future research, right? Or areas that need to be researched further, or areas that have not been researched that need to be researched. Sometimes they give good ideas, right? So if you can invest your time in reading like research synthesis or literature review papers, that can also inspire you to come up with, really cool ideas that you can try, right? And like I said, in most instances, the authors already have a discussion about topics that need to be explored further, right? Also, when you read academic papers, make sure that you check out the discussion about areas for future research, usually in the conclusion section. So not every paper has this, but in most cases, in the conclusion section, the authors would provide some discussion about, okay, we did this in our study. We talked about what has been done. This is what we do. This is what we think needs to be done in the future, right? So usually they have one or two good ideas that you can learn from, right? So again, I'm just giving you some sources that you can go to when you brainstorm interesting original ideas. The next source is business magazines and news, right? So this is something that I like to do myself, is don't just invest your time in reading academic journals, right? Also read, business magazines and news, which are easy to get online, right? A big chunk of my research ideas in the past came from reading articles from business newspapers, like CFO magazine or CIO magazine. Because in these magazines and news articles, obviously they talk about topics that are ongoing, right? They don't talk about they're not academic articles, but there are some topics that can be interesting to examine. The next source of research ideas that can potentially have contribution is try to read research and surveys by professional or industry organizations. So there are a lot of there's a lot of professional organizations like the Big Four audit firms that conduct studies by themselves or surveys, and they distribute this or they publish this publicly. I like to read those materials because usually they survey topics that these organizations care about at the moment, right? And this could be a good source of research ideas for us, right? So let me give you some example. So for example, this is a survey that was conducted by Deloitte. So this is the Deloitte Global 2021 Millennial and Gen Z survey. So this survey talks about CSR or ESG topics that are being talked about by the younger generation. So by simply looking at this survey or this study by Deloitte, it can inspire research ideas that we can do on our own. This is an example of a study by Mckinsey and Company, a global survey of consumer sentiment during the coronavirus crisis. Right, so McKinsey, as you know, is a well-known consulting firm. This is a survey that was done by Black Line. It talks about mistrust in numbers, the global scale of financial data inaccuracies. Another one by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Every year they publish a global fraud survey. It talks about the sources of fraud, how fraud is detected inside organizations. So these are not academic papers or academic articles, but if you read these sources or materials, it can give you good inspiration for research ideas. The last source of research idea is simply talking with people. All right? I would encourage you to talk with industry practitioners, executives, audit commissioners, board of directors, regulators. How do you talk with them? Well, you're in the perfect place, right? You're at Universitas Indonesia, whose network is by far better than anyone, right? So using your network, talk with business practitioners, really know what business problems they're facing, what business issues they're facing, right? You're in the perfect place because you have access to people in industry, people in government, people in government enterprises, right? Talk with your peers, talk with your professors, talk with your mentors. So this is my message. When you have research, it's not something you do on your own, right? Except your dissertation. We have to get into this mindset that research is a team sport, but it's up to you to reach out to people, to build your network. But when you reach out to people, make sure you have something to offer, right? Maybe you're offering an idea, or you're offering data analysis, right? But research is not something that we can do just by ourselves, right? We have to branch out. Let's talk about more deeply about contribution. I want to talk about some findings by this paper by David Wood, who's a co-author of mine. He's at Brigham Young University, and he is comparing the publication process in accounting, economics, finance, management, marketing, psychology, and the natural science. So this is some of the findings from that paper. And this is where I think we need to improve. So one of the first findings is that accounting faculty believe reviewers focus too much on incremental contribution to prior research, right? Unfortunately. Faculty from all disciplines believe that reviewers do not receive sufficient training on how to evaluate manuscript. This is very dangerous, right? But this is reality. A lot of editors are sending manuscript to reviewers that are not properly trained to review manuscript. That's why in my PhD seminar at Kansas, I dedicate a lot of time talking about how to properly review papers in a fair manner. Faculty from all disciplines believe that well-known researchers get preferential treatment in the review process. This is also dangerous, right? Where it's only people from well-known universities or people that are connected with the editor. So this is something that we cannot control, right? But it's something that we need to know and be aware of. Like I said, rejection. I'm going to now talk about 4 areas of rejection, reasons, and how we can combat them. Okay. The first reason for rejection is not enough incremental contribution. Not enough contribution. So I wanted to show you some real rejection that I have received. So I'm going to show you 2 rejection letters that I received in 2019. So this first one is a rejection that I received from Contemporary Accounting Research. This is only the start of the rejection letter. It reads that unfortunately, both reviewers recommend rejection. After reading your paper and reports more carefully, I'm afraid I concur. The review report should be of help to you in understanding the details. I share with first reviewers concerned that contribution of the paper is narrow. So the first point that the editor brings up is that the contribution is too narrow. This is another rejection that I received from Auditing Journal of Practice and Theory in the same month, in April 2019. So it says, unfortunately, both reviewers have deep observation, etc. Each referee has provided a detailed set of comments. Both reviewers raise similar concerns about the incremental contribution of the paper. In this letter, again, the first point is contribution, right? So your paper can be done perfectly, meaning that you have good results. Econometrically, you've done everything right? You've considered endogeneity, you've done all the advanced tests and things like that. But if the reviewers do not feel that there's contribution, it will get rejected. But I ask this question, are we hurting ourselves in the business research discipline by focusing too much on contribution? Let's take a look at journals in the natural sciences arena, so outside of business discipline. What do they do, right? So this is a journal called Nature Scientific Reports. So this is a journal in the natural and clinical science. So if you look at the H index or citation index for this journal, it's by far much higher than any journal we have in business. So this journal matters a lot, right? Let's take a look at the policy that this journal has. In their policy, it reads, or it says that to be published in scientific reports, a paper must be scientifically valid and technically sound in methodology and analysis. Manuscripts are not assessed based on their perceived importance, significance, or impact. The research community makes such judgment after publication. So if you look at this journal, it actually instructs its reviewers to not focus on contribution, right? It says that the community or the research community makes such judgment. How? Well, if the paper is cited, that means it's important, right? But if you look at this, it says the manuscripts are not assessed based on their importance, significance, or impact, or contribution. Okay. Another journal called PLOS One, PLOS1. This is a journal in the biochemistry and biological science. Also a very important journal because its H index is very, very high. It reads in the policy that unlike many journals, which attempt to use the peer review process to determine whether or not an article reaches the level of importance required by a given journal. PLOS One uses peer review to determine whether a paper is technically rigorous. So also, this journal does not use the review process to determine contribution, right? So, unfortunately, because we are in the business research discipline, we have to care about contribution. So what do? So contribution, first of all, is very subjective. And it's very easy for reviewers to complain about lack of contribution. Is there a p-value that we can show for contribution? Is there an R-square that we can show for contribution? There is not, right? There is not an objective measure that we can show for contribution. So it's a feeling. It's a subjective feeling. So what do? What should we do? So here's my main takeaway. First of all, we cannot just assume that the editor and reviewers know how our study contributes. So sometimes we say, okay, we show significant results, right? Surely the editor and reviewer will understand how we contribute. We cannot do that. We cannot assume. It is our job in the paper to write or to explain why and how our study contributes in detail or specifically. That's the key, right? We all say we contribute, blah, 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 but we need to give as much comprehensive detail and specifics as possible. We cannot take the risk that the editor or reviewers will not know exactly how our study contributes. We really need to think about what prior literature has already shown and not shown. So when you do your literature review, be as comprehensive as possible, right? Don't try to hide not discussing certain papers because you're afraid that you won't show enough contribution. Assume that the editor and reviewer will know every paper in the literature, right? So try to be as forthcoming and really discuss prior literature in a comprehensive manner. And this is also a very important point. It is not enough. It is not enough to say that we are the first to study a particular issue. Right? This is a common thing that we all do, including myself, right? But we cannot fall into this trap that we say, prior research has not examined blah, etc. Or we are the first one to study this particular topic. Because maybe we are the first one to study because it's not that important to study in the first place, right? So because it is not enough to say we are the first, we need to communicate why our research question is important in the first place. So what I'm saying is, yes, we can say that there is a gap in the literature, that our topic has not been examined before. We are the first ones to examine. But you have to go beyond that and explain why the research question is important to examine in the first place, right? So let me give you some examples of contribution points, and maybe some of these apply in your own research. But not all of them will apply. Some of them will apply. At the very minimum, we can say that our study adds to the body of knowledge about a particular topic, right? But we have to be specific and detailed enough to write out exactly how. What are the areas that we contribute, right? Or maybe our findings are different than what has been found before, right? So if you happen to do research where you find results that are maybe different than what prior research has found, so that is a good contribution point that you can sell, right? How about this? Our study helps answers a call for future research given by prior academics. So maybe the research question that you have is already something that prior papers or prior researchers have also wanted to be asked or wanted to be researched further. So remember earlier in the presentation, I talked about how it's, sometimes you can read papers that have where the authors describe areas for future research, right? So some research will say, things like future research should investigate X because blah, blah, blah. So if your research paper helps answer this call, then for sure you have to mention that, right? You have to mention that your study is answering a call of future research that has already been asked for by prior academics. Or maybe our study helps answers a debate of ideas in the academic circles or in industry practice. So this is also a good source of contribution. If you're studying a research idea where in the industry there is a big debate, right, of, is a particular practice beneficial? Is a particular practice too costly, right? So to give you a concrete example, I'm doing a research paper right now that is under Revise and Resubmit at Contemporary Accounting Research. And in that paper, we're examining the influence of technology in internal auditing, right? So whether more use of technology in internal auditing tasks gives more effective or efficient outcomes in terms of auditing. So in that paper, we make an argument, because this is what's going on. There is a debate, at least in the US, about whether investments in technology for audit tasks yields benefit or if it's too costly, right? There's also a debate in the literature in auditing and also information system about whether the use of technology at this point is worth the cost, right? So we're able to show benefits, we're able to also show some costs. So we argue in our paper that we contribute to this ongoing debate about whether the implementation of technology in audit tasks or audit engagement is worth the benefit, right? And it worked, right? The editor felt that, there's some contribution there. So if your paper has this, make sure you sell it, right? Again, it's your job to sell your contribution, right? Do not depend on the editor or the reviewer to know what the contribution is. Or maybe your study contributes to a stream of research that is still new and emerging, right? If you happen to have a research paper like this, that's good, right? You have good momentum, because then you can sell the idea that, the topic that you're looking at is still new, is still emerging, there's not much prior literature, and you're also contributing because you're also motivating even more research to start on this particular issue, right? Or perhaps your study presents unique and novel data points. So maybe you have proprietary data that is not publicly available that you were able to secure on your own. That's a selling point, right? Or maybe you were able to compile public data, archival data, that maybe future researchers can also use. That's also a good selling point, right? Another example that you can talk about is how your study opens the door for future researchers to expand on your findings. So maybe you have a research study, but you identify, or you can talk about different avenues of future research, right? This is also a good contribution point, because you can communicate to the editor that if you publish my paper, the paper can then motivate or inspire future researchers to also expand on your study, right? But if you choose to go this route, you need to be specific in how future researchers can use or expand on your research. Right? So again, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you some examples of things that you can really talk about in the paper as points for you to sell your contribution. Or how about this? This is another example. Our study combines multiple research methods to comprehensively answer a research question. So perhaps maybe you have a paper where you combine archival and experimental data, or a study where you combine archival and qualitative data, right? I have had some good luck doing something like this, where I combine archival and experimental, or combining archival methods and qualitative. If you do have this, then sell it, right? Make this as a good or important contribution point. Or you have something like this. You have a study that informs multiple research areas or research disciplines. Like I mentioned earlier, innovative papers in the future may be the ones that combine or bridge multiple research disciplines or multiple research areas. So if you have this, then talk about it, right? Talk about how your study not only contributes to the accounting literature, but how it contributes to the marketing literature, for example, right? So to give you a concrete example, I have a working paper right now where we're looking at how consumers, right? Consumers or products incorporate unreliable accounting information in their purchasing decisions, right? So we're selling that paper as a paper that contributes to accounting and also marketing, right? More importantly, or not more importantly, but also equally important, try to talk about practical contributions, right? So talk about how business practitioners can learn from our study to help them make decisions, or how business practitioners can implement our research findings to improve their business practice. So most often what we see is we focus too much on contribution to academic literature, but not enough on practical contribution. Let's try to invest more time or effort to talk about how our study can contribute to business practice, right? And I know this is not easy, right? Because in reality, it's not that executives or companies implement our papers in a practical or direct way, but we have to be creative in talking about how business practitioners can use or be informed about our findings, about our study. Maybe it helps them improve their ongoing business practice. Maybe it helps them avoid unethical practices, right? Maybe it helps them make better business decisions to improve performance, right? Whatever it is our job to communicate all practical contributions, right? So if your study can inform multiple categories of shareholders, you're in good luck, right? So if you have a research study that your finding can inform not just one, not just two, but multiple stakeholders, like managers, Dewan Komisaris, audit committee, regulators, auditors, investors, you have a good selling point for contribution, right? So really think about how your study or how your findings can be informative to many different types of stakeholders. Because I think in most cases, our research can inform multiple parties, not just CEOs, not just CFOs, not just auditors, but all these different. But again, in our paper, it is our job to explain in more detail about how specifically each stakeholder can learn from our study. Does that make sense? Okay, from a strategy standpoint, try to cite as many papers from the journal that you are submitting, right? So for example, let's say you're going to submit to journal X, right? Try to cite as many papers from journal X as possible. Okay? I once had the unfortunate experience of submitting a paper where I did not cite a single paper from the journal that I submitted to. The next day, I got a desk rejection from the editor saying, "You didn't cite any paper from my journal. Why are you submitting to my journal?" What does the editor want? The editor wants to feel that his or her journal is important, right? He or she wants the journal to be cited, right? So from a strategic standpoint, you know the journal you're submitting to, right? So try to get as many relevant papers from that journal as possible and cite it in your work. That shows contribution. Contribution to the journal. Contribution to the journal that you are submitting to. Does this make sense? Right? So it's very easy to do, right? You basically have to just just have to browse through the papers from that journal and pick out maybe 4, 5, 6 papers that are relevant and somehow cite it in your paper, right? If you know the editor or editorial team that will handle your paper, try to cite as many of his or her papers. If you go to the journal website, you know who the editorial team is, right? Or you at least know the senior editor. If he or she has papers that are relevant to your work, then cite them. It will demonstrate to the editor, oh, they cited my work, right? It will improve the perception that you're contributing. This is all strategy, right? It's very easy to do because in the journal, you know who the editors are, or at least the editorial board, right? There's usually 5 to 6, 7 people. You know, try to see if any of them are doing work in your area, and if they are, cite it, right? Okay, the second reason for rejection is not enough scope of the paper or analysis. So scope is basically the size, substance, and length of the research paper. And again, this can depend on the journal we are targeting. But we have to really ask ourselves, do we have enough substance? Do we have enough substance in our paper to show contribution? So but here, the warning is we cannot simply focus on page length. I'm not necessarily talking about page length, because if you're focusing too much on page length, then maybe you're writing things that you don't need to write about. Maybe you're repeating a lot of information, right? So the questions you want to answer are, what is the number of testable hypotheses? How much analysis do you want to provide? Here the answer is, well, we want to show enough analysis to answer our research question comprehensively. So nowadays, it's not enough to just have one hypothesis in a paper, right? We have a main hypothesis, but then we have to show several other hypotheses where maybe we look at different cross-sectional settings, or we look at how our main findings apply at different cuts or settings, right? Analysis, how much is enough? Well, we have to show enough analysis to answer our research question comprehensively. So when we talk about scope, we have to think about, okay, additional analysis and robustness testing. What's the number one thing usually accounting review teams ask about is endogeneity, right? How do you handle endogeneity? Do you do, propensity score matching, entropy balancing, difference in difference tests, firm fixed effects, right? All these different techniques. If you can show beyond your basic data analysis, if you show additional analysis and robustness to show that your results are robust, it will show scope, right? Or potentially consider adding evidence from supplementary data, right? So in some cases, in my own work, in addition to archival data, I also show results from interviews that I do on auditors or business practitioners, Another way to show scope is to provide more discussion on direction for future research. So this is something at the end of the research paper, perhaps in the conclusion section, where you can talk more about how, given your study, how can future work expand on what you're doing. That can also increase your scope, right? In terms of what you can talk about in your paper. But at the same time, I think that we need to be more forthcoming about the limitations of our study, and we need to discuss our limitation in a way that can motivate future research. So sometimes we don't want to talk about limitations because it somehow reduces our contribution, but it's going to come up. The review team will ask about this sooner or later. So sometimes it's strategic to discuss your limitations up front and be honest about what data we do not have and what we cannot do. But at the same time, when we say that we cannot do something because of data limitations, we can then explain how future research can explore a particular issue. Number three, the number three reason for rejection is not enough theoretical justification or link, right? Not enough theoretical justification or link. So what I want to say is it is not enough that we have significant results. So most often we have tables and we have strong results and we say, okay, we have strong results. Surely they know why we have strong results. But it is not enough. We have to assume that the reviewer is the most skeptical person. So we need to work on having the most convincing arguments as possible. Okay? So in your mind, you have to think about, even though we have good results, we have to think about how the reader is going to be skeptical. So it is our job to write arguments that are as persuasive, that are based on theory, that are based on solid arguments as possible. So more specifically, it is not enough to describe the theory that we are using. So this is something that we're good at, right? We can describe the theory. For example, we use agency theory. We are very good in explaining what agency theory is. We're good at explaining what prior papers have done with agency theory. So that's not the hard part. The more difficult part, and the part that we need to focus more on, is we need to explain how the theory is relevant to our setting, how the theory is applied to form our arguments, and how the theory supports our hypothesis, right? So we just can't say what agency theory is, what prior papers have done. We need to talk about or explain how agency theory or whatever theory is applied in our particular setting using our own words. Does this make sense? Right? And the key here is to be as specific as possible. To be as specific as possible in how the theory is applied to form our expectations. Also, it is not enough to list all of the prior literature that is relevant to our study. We're good at this, right? We can find 20 papers that are relevant, and we can talk about how author X in this year find this, or author Y in this year find this, right? We're very good at doing that, but what we need to focus more on is we need to explain specifically how prior studies build toward our arguments. Need to explain specifically how prior studies support our hypothesis. So what if all of these papers find X, find Y, find what? So what? How is that relevant to what our setting? How does that then build or help build the argument underlying our hypothesis, right? I think this is the key. It's not enough just to find the theory and find the papers. We need to really explain in detail or specifically how those things, how those sources is applied to our setting, how those things form our specific arguments, right? Any tension in your hypothesis, we need to present all sides of the argument, not just the ones that support our results, right? So think about tension as possibly a good thing, right? So we can all fall into this trap of we only want to talk about arguments or theoretical arguments that support our results. But remember, think about the reviewer as being skeptical, right? So maybe it's advantageous that we show tension and we demonstrate how there are alternative arguments to our main arguments. Does this make sense? And why our research question is not so obvious, and that our research question needs empirical investigation to answer it, right? But this is my message: do not overly force tension, right? So in some cases, if we try too hard to force tension, the problem is sometimes that the other arguments or the other side of the argument may not make sense, right? So sometimes we cannot overly force tension, right? Okay, the final thing I want to talk about is number 4 is not enough writing quality, right? So unfortunately, you can have really good contribution. It's a really good idea. You have really good results. You have strong theoretical arguments. But if you write it in a way that has poor writing quality, it can get rejected. So unfortunately, if we're targeting Scopus journals, what language are those journals in? They're in English, right? So, what I want to say is that even English-speaking authors struggle with writing quality. Do not just assume that all English-speaking authors have good writing quality, right? So, just really quickly, the first draft usually, I do not worry about writing quality. For the first draft, we just want to get the ideas on paper, right? So for my specific process, I start building an outline for all sections of the paper, and then once the outline is ready, then we fill in the details. So it's a process, right? Writing quality, it's a process that we have to all go through. So if we start with building an outline and then filling in the details, that can help. Make sure that each paragraph has a clear idea or objective, and use brief and succinct sentences. I used to think that if I use complex sentences or long sentences, that would make me seem smart, and editors like that. But it actually backfires because it's harder to read, right? And it annoys the reviewer. So try to use brief and succinct sentences. Clear. Clarity is the best, right? Not long, complex sentences. Take advantage of technology and resources. In the beginning of the presentation, Budesi mentioned the writing buddies program, right? Take advantage of those resources. Install Grammarly. Do you use Grammarly in your writing, right? Take advantage of all the resources. Copy editors, right? We use copy editors, right, to proofread our work. So all of those resources are very important in terms of writing quality. Writing quality can really matter. In some cases, you may have a paper. I've seen this and I've experienced this, where maybe our contribution is so-so, but our writing quality is very good, and sometimes those papers can make it in, can be successful, right? Writing style can be an issue when having multiple authors, right? So we need to make sure that writing flow is continuous and smooth. So this is a problem when you have research teams and you divide each section to different authors, and each person have different styles. So usually what I do is I would ask the person that has the best writing to then go through the entire thing and make sure that the writing is continuous, right? So be aware of that. Try to lessen repetition between sections of the paper. This is very easy to do. Like, for example, between the introduction and section 2, it's impossible to eliminate it, but just try to reduce repetition as much as you can. Basically, the easier it is to read, the better. Okay. So I don't have that much time, maybe 10 minutes left. What I want to do right now, for the time I have left, I want to give you a template. I want to give you a template of writing a cover letter for journal submission, and also on writing the introduction section of your paper. Because I really believe that the introduction section of your paper is the most important part. Right? The introduction section is where you can really sell your paper to the reviewers, or it can be the place where you can lose the reviewer, right? So at this part, I want to give you a template on how you can structure the introduction section. And I'm not saying it's the only way, right? I'm just saying this is my approach. And hopefully it is beneficial, right? Okay, let's start with the cover letter. Cover letter, in most journals, it's mandatory. In most cases, for me, it's 1 to 2 pages. 1 to 2 pages. Is the cover letter important? Is it? I don't know. I don't know if the editor reads it. But let's assume it's important, right? Let's assume that the editor really reads it. In most cases, it is the first thing that the editor reads, right? So it at least sets a tone in how the editor will approach your paper. Does that make sense? So in the cover letter, I start with an opening paragraph, right? So this is what I write. Dear editor of Journal X, we're pleased to submit our manuscript titled blah. This manuscript has not been published previously, is not under consideration for publication elsewhere, and will not be submitted to other journals while under review at Journal X. We have also enclosed the required journal submission fee of X, right? So this is my opening, very generic paragraph, right? So once you have an opening, so do not just stop here, right? This is not the letter. We don't just say, this is our paper, I paid it, here you go. You see what I'm saying? The next paragraphs, what is motivating your research? For example, what is the business problem that is arising or is affecting multiple stakeholders? Are you resolving a debate in the literature or in business practice? What gaps are you addressing in the literature? So the next paragraph, you want to educate the editor. What is it that first motivated you to embark on this research journey, right? What is it that's motivating the research idea that we have to know the answer to? That is relevant to the business world, that is relevant to academic research. So after this discussion, then what is it that you are doing in the study and what do you find? Right? What is the objective of your study? And go ahead and explain what is it that you find. Right? So those are going to be my next paragraphs. After that, how is the study making an academic contribution? How is the study making a business practice contribution? So usually my concluding paragraph talks about how these, very succinctly, right? Because we only have 1 or 2 pages. What is the exact contribution we're making to the literature? What is the contribution we're making to business practice? So these are the stuff I just talked about, right, in the earlier slides. And after that, how is the study contributing to the journal's mission and objective? Because usually every journal has a mission, has a topic, or has an objective. If you go to their website and you learn that, if you can, try to talk about how your paper can advance this specific journal's stated mission or objective. Remember, I talked about how, from a strategy standpoint, try to cite as many papers from the journal as you can. Talk about that. Talk about how in this paper, we're advancing prior research that have been published in your journal that looked at this, this, and this. We're going to, so try to make a case to the editor why this journal is the perfect fit for your paper, right? So all of that, can you somehow try to write all of this in 1 or 2 pages, single space. I have personally had good luck using this template. Okay. Again, I'm not saying this is the right one. I'm just saying this is one that I have used. Very quickly, I know we don't have that much time, but what I want to do, I want to give you a template for the introduction section. Because again, this is where we can really sell our paper, or this is where our paper can die. Because if a reviewer, most reviewers read the introduction, and if he or she doesn't like the introduction, they stop. They don't read the other parts. So you invest a lot of time creating really pretty tables, really good results. But if the introduction, you don't grab the reviewer's interest in the paper, it's all for nothing, right? So, I'll be happy to share these slides so you can kind of have it. So I go paragraph by paragraph. So the introduction is 5 to 7 pages usually. I've gotten comments before where the editor says the introduction is actually too long and I have to shorten it. Okay. So paragraph 1 is the research objective. This is where we have to clearly state what we are doing in the research study. We have to explain the topic of investigation, what research question we are trying to answer. So right off the gate, our very first paragraph, we write, this is our objective. This is what we're trying to answer. I have had comments in the past from reviewers saying that it took too long to know what you were doing in the study. It took too long, because in that paper, it was not until page 3 did I describe what I was actually doing. So from then on, I want to make the case from the first paragraph, this is the exact research objective I have. Paragraph 2 to 3, this is about research motivation. So for example, we can discuss the motivation for the study, why the research question is important, what business problem is motivating you to conduct the research, what current development in the business world is driving your research. Remember, fight the urge to just say, I conduct this research because we are the first one to study this. That's not what this is, right? Why do I have to read it? Why is the answer to your research question so pressing that you have to do this and has to be published, right? You have to make the case in these 2 paragraphs. Page 4 and 5, this is where we explain the theoretical mechanism that underlies our hypothesis or expectation. So we need to concisely discuss our theoretical arguments and hypothesis, explain the theoretical foundations of the research, explain the arguments that motivate the research hypothesis, basically what you expect to find in one. Be careful here that you do not just copy and paste from section 2. Section 2 is your hypothesis development, right? I'm not talking about copy and pasting. I'm talking about summarizing concisely by not repeating section 2. What is it? What is the theory that is underlying your expectations, right? Paragraph 6 and 7 is about execution and findings. So in general, how do you execute the study? Talk about the data you're using, how you obtain the data, any unique data sources that you're using. If you're using proprietary data, for example, survey, right, from companies, make sure they know how much effort it took for you to get that, right? Make that as a selling point. How are you measuring your main variables of interest, right? And in those paragraphs, summarize your main findings and results, discuss your main findings, discuss your additional analysis, robustness check, right? So let's say you have, let's say you're doing, you communicate your main finding, but let's say you do some further techniques to corroborate your finding. You do PSM, you do entropy balancing, you do diff and diff, you do firm fixed effects, right? You do treatment effects models, right? Make sure you say that in the introduction, I usually say we run a battery of robustness tests or something like that, blah, 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 to substantiate our finding, right? Communicate that up front, right, in the introduction. And based on the findings, what you conclude. Okay. So the last paragraphs 8 and 10 is all about contribution. So to me, in the introduction section, for me, these are probably the most important paragraphs. So in paragraph 8 to 10, you want to start with academic contributions. You want to state all of the research areas that the study contributes to. In most cases, your study will contribute to more than just one area of research, right? So make sure you communicate all of the different areas that you're contributing to and how. Summarize what is currently known in prior research, right? Give details on how your study is different from prior work. How does the study add to what we already know? What gaps in the literature are addressed? So this is your chance. In these paragraphs, this is your opportunity to really communicate and sell how you make an academic contribution. The mantra is more detail, the more specific, the better, right? And do not, again, I say it again, do not just assume that the editor knows how you contribute. It is your job to sell. And then your final paragraphs of the introduction this is when you want to explain business practice contributions. Business practice contributions that we talked about earlier. How does the study inform different stakeholders like executives, board of directors, employees, auditors, business analysts? Can the study help change business practice and make better business decisions? Or maybe your research helps practitioners avoid unethical practices or things they should avoid. Or you can argue that you educate business practitioners on how certain phenomena can hurt, their business. Any contribution to public policy or regulators, right? So in most papers I see, even published, in most papers I see a lot of focus is on academic contribution. But I know that a lot of editors nowadays like it when we can examine this because they want to feel, even though it doesn't happen in real life, they want to feel that their journal is being read or can be read by business practitioners, auditors, executives, right? So it is our job to sell how our study can accomplish that. Okay. So I'm sorry I went beyond. Okay. Thank you. Like I say, I will be happy to share this with Budesi, and she can distribute this to the participants, just in case this is useful for your own research. Okay. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you here and everyone in Zoom land for sticking by until the end. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, this material has been conveyed by our beloved speaker, Prof. Adi Masli. And thank you for this great beneficial material, Prof. And next we come to the next session is a question and answer session. I can see this from this chat. Oh, there's many questions here. But for the first chance, I will give for the floor here. Please raise hand. Okay. Okay. There are two people here, yeah.
Okay, we do one at a
Okay.
time.
Yes.
One question at a time.
Oh,
Is that okay?
it's okay. Okay. From Ibu. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Adi, for the presentation. My question is a basic question. What is exactly the difference between Q1 and Q2 Scopus Journal? Is it in the methodological or originality or the scope of the research? Because as for me, considering the effort or the difficulty to publish in the both journal is the same. Maybe that's my first question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So the question is, yes. So it's a really good question that we all kind of wondered, right? So the question is the difference in the journals between Q1, Q2, right? Q3, Q4, or even how does a journal get listed on Scopus or not, right? So Scopus is actually kind of new to me because in the US we don't use Scopus or anything like that. For me, the issue is that for me the journal list is very limited, right? We have the top 5, at least in accounting journals, and then we have maybe 6 or 7 journals after that, right? So my understanding with the Q1 and Q2 is they have H index, which is driven also by citation. So how much of the papers in the journal is cited by subsequent work? So the more citation that that journal has, the higher the H index. So it's like an impact factor, right? So my understanding also that in Q1, journals in Scopus can move from Q1 to Q2. It's not fixed, right? It can move. So for example, I'm an editor right now at Journal of Information System, right? It is now Q1. Before, several years ago, it was Q2, I believe. The way it moved from Q2 to Q1 is there has been more subsequent work that have cited prior articles in GIS, and that improved its kind of its H index, right? So in terms of Scopus, my understanding also it also depends on the push that editors of these journals have to promote their journals, right? To Scopus. So remember my slide about what we cannot control, what we can't control. So something we cannot control is what journals are listed in Scopus and the like, right? So it's all about impact factor. That's why editors, this is the deal. When I'm an editor, I care about if I accept your paper, is it going to be cited, right? Is it going to be read? That's why contribution is a big deal, is because our paper cannot really get cited as much if the contribution is perceived to be low, right? So editors of journals, their number one thing is citation, right? Because citation means that they improve the impact factor, it improves the importance of their journals and things like that, right? So earlier I had slides that I talked about how you have to be careful or be aware of these predatory journals, right? These predatory journals, I read somewhere that these predatory journals across all disciplines, there's like 8,000 of them. But these predatory journals, even if they're relevant now, they're not sustainable. Their impact factor at some point is going to deteriorate. So that's why I mentioned earlier that we have to be careful about this phenomenon about predatory journals who's basically trying to get your money, right? They're trying to get just these super expensive fees without any review process. It's a shame for us to have our paper have a home like that where it will live in a journal that cannot sustain, right? I'm sorry, did I answer your question? So if you go to Scopus or Schemago, you can see their H index, and it's all driven by citation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Maybe related to the first question, we can move to the this question from the chat related with from Samuel Tumiwa, still related with the scope of
Okay.
semester.
So the question reads, why is it difficult for qualitative research articles to be included in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4? Yeah, so what I've learned from just conversing with academic community, I personally value qualitative research because there's a lot of research questions that can be answered, that can only be answered in qualitative research. But it feels like reviewers are hesitant to publish qualitative research because they're concerned about generalizability to, beyond the scope of what is being studied in the qualitative research, right? So that's the number one concern. But I'm actually seeing in the top tier journals, actually there have been a bit more qualitative papers being published because they have fascinating, interesting, original research questions that are being asked. For example, I have one co-author who has a paper in AOS, Accounting Organization and Society, which is a qualitative paper about fraud. And her subjects, she was able to interview perpetrators of fraud that have been in jail, that talk about the motivation for them committing fraud and things like that. So qualitative research, I still think qualitative research can be published in top tier journals. It just depends on the originality or the interest of the research question itself, right? So I would, in the past, yes, it hasn't been published a lot because also it's a numbers game. At least in the U.S., there's not that many qualitative researchers out there. By far, there's more archival than maybe experimental. But what I have done in the past for my own work, I have combined archival and qualitative. So I have some papers where I use archival data and I combine that with interview results of audit committee, of chief audit executives, of auditors. And remember my slide about contribution? I tried to sell that as a contribution point of combining multiple methods, and it worked, right? They somehow appreciated that. So if you are embarking on qualitative research, I would support doing that because I think qualitative research can provide a lot of good contribution. It just depends on the research question itself, whether it has broad appeal and whether it has really good originality as perceived by review team.
Thank you, Prof. Next, from Natalka, registered student.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation, Prof. Adi. As you mentioned that we have a research idea from magazine, a newspaper, or like that. Maybe I have an idea from the newspaper, but when I search the keywords on Scholar, it is not enough for the prior literature. So how we handle that problem? We don't have enough prior literature which can support our theory for the paper.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So this question pertains to what if you have kind of a novel research idea, whether it be a newspaper or some other source, where there is not that much prior literature on that specific topic, right, to motivate any theoretical argument, right? I say that that can be a positive, for me, because I think, I mentioned in one of the contribution points, we can sell a contribution where we're potentially contributing to a new area or emerging area of research, right? So, so what I would do in building the background, there has to be prior literature, even if it's not directly associated with the exact topic or research keyword. There has to be prior literature about something that's, at least surrounding that, right? there has to be something, even though it's not specifically about your specific question. There has to be background on prior literature that somehow is the most relevant, right? So I would start with that, right? In terms of building your background section. Now, in terms of your hypothesis, what I have done in the past for things like that, where I didn't have that much theory or literature, then I have to rely on using my own logic and argument in writing the most persuasive arguments and logic, maybe based on my own, kind of self-logic, self-argument, but also maybe based on materials that are not from academic literature, but are from business press or magazine. Or one time I used anecdotal evidence from interviews of partners, of auditors, to see what they think about this particular issue, right? So it's not all just about prior literature, right? Prior literature, there's a reason why it's called prior literature. It's what's been done, right? We're looking at something that hasn't been done. So in that case, I would just use all of the above, right, that I just mentioned. But we have to kind of write as best we can to be as convincing and persuasive as possible, right? But just because there's not a specific paper that says X doesn't mean that there is not a logical argument to support what we're expecting to find, right? So I've used references or citations that are not from academic literature, from business press, news. I've used anecdotal evidence. I've used interview results from relevant practitioners or stakeholders about a particular issue. All of those help, So that's what I would say. That would be the most direct way to handle that. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Prof. We back to the Zoom.
Okay.
Question from Zoom from Retno Wulandari, still about the literature. I mean, how many literature yes.
How many literature or academic journal needed to get research topic? You also mentioned that one kind of contribution point is answer prior research. What does that mean if it's not a new topic, even though research must be something new? Okay, so the new research topic we kind of talked about earlier, in terms of how many literature or academic journal needed to get a research topic. So what I would do is, there's not a set number, right, that we can give. But usually what I do in my process, if I want to gather prior literature on internal audit, for example, right, I start with the top tier journals, right, the top 6. That's number 1, right? You have Accounting Review, Journal of Accounting Economics, JAR, RAS. All of the papers in those journals, going back maybe as far as I can, I try to just read all the titles and see which are the most relevant and then kind of download those, right? And then I filter them on. But then you don't stop there, because some people stop at just looking at the top tiers. But what I would do to get a complete set, an idea about prior literature, I also go to the next journals. So like sectional journals, like Journal of Accounting Public Policy, basically Q1, Q2, other Q1, Q2 journals that also are relevant, right? So at least you want to cover your bases in the more prominent journals, the top tier journals, but also the secondary journals are also important. Also, another strategy I use is I go to the earliest paper about that topic in Google Scholar. And you know how in Google Scholar you can find out for every paper, you can find out all of the subsequent paper that cite that paper. It has cited by, right? So you click on a paper, it has cited by, like it has 100 papers that cite that paper. Then I look through that list and see what papers in that list is relevant for my prior literature review, right? So, because that will take me on a timeline to see from the earliest paper to what's being done now, all of the papers that are citing that original work, right? So I think, I think that approach can be beneficial.
Okay, thank you, Prof. The next question from Remy.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Prof. Adi for your comprehensive presentation. So, you mentioned about the importance of the writing, right? Usually for me, in my first or the second paragraph, I describe regarding like the gaps of from the previous study or the problem that motivates me to conduct the study. But sometimes my paper seems like a slow burner, bro. So just like you mentioned before that uh, I s- uh, I write about my purpose of study or my objective of the study is like in like maybe third or fourth page. So how we elaborate our introduction paragraph, Prof. So like we can attract the interest of our readers in since the beginning that since they read of my paper. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah. So, so going back to the template that we just talked about, right? So yeah, you can the order that I talk about, you can do it any way, right? But yeah, the research motivation is super important because I think um, even right now, even when I have papers that are already nearing acceptance, the editor wants me to somehow improve those first paragraphs about motivation, right? So um, from my point of view, research motivation is not just about addressing gaps in the literature, right? It's also addressing relevant business problems or business issues that happen kind of in real life, right? Or that can affect multiple stakeholders of a company or a business, right? So I try to make the best case possible on how my research question is important to examine because it has these real tangible consequences, right? And how it can affect multiple areas of business, multiple stakeholders. Of course, address the gaps of literature, right? Not much is known about blah blah blah, right? So I would just kind of do a combination of all those things and try to communicate that very early in the introduction, right? So so usually this is more easy to do when you have a paper, let's say, on regulatory changes, right? So because it's very easy to say that there's this regulatory change, but it's unclear whether this regulatory has a net benefit impact on something. So sometimes it's kind of clear, but there are some research questions that are not as clear that you have to work harder on to demonstrate. But the whole idea about that paragraph is um, is trying to convey to the reader why the reader should read beyond just that paragraph, right? What is it to help the editor understand why is it that you chose to study this research idea when you could have chosen anything else, right? Why is it this important for you to examine? Because it must have some consequence to real business users. It must be something that future research can learn from and expand on, right? So my whole thing is you have to just communicate that as detailed as possible, and not just rely on the editor just to know what it is, right? Um, so if maybe later on, if you have time, we can discuss your specific context, and we can talk more about how to elaborate that. Thank you.
Yeah, this is my problem too. Our problem, yeah, as doctoral student. Okay, next, maybe question from Gama is related with previous questions from Retno. Okay, this is second question from Retno.
Okay.
About gap.
Let me just read for 1 second.
Yes. Banyak ya.
Next one.
This one. Should we maybe practice the research?
Yeah.
Yes.
So for this question, yeah. So if we get let's say we identify a topic, the question is, should we check another paper which is a related topic to make sure that the topic? Yes. So that's standard practice where if you come up with a research idea, no matter what it is, it's always good practice before you do anything, before you start collecting data or starting data analysis to read or check not only prior literature but also to look at working papers. So what I would do is I would go to SSRN. You have SSRN, right? That's a collection of working papers. So yes, it's always very good practice to understand, at least at that time, what related papers are associated with your topic, right? Because you kind of need to know what the competition kind of looks like. And remember what I talked about, how in the idea generation phase, we have to do more due diligence and not rush and really think about whether this is worth doing. So this is part of that phase where we need to see as best we can to see what other competing papers may be there. Now, just because there's a competing paper that's related doesn't mean that you should shy away. Maybe you adjust your research question, or maybe you try to make a case how your paper is different and incremental to that paper, right? So I would, so check like Google Scholar, SSRN, and have a broad reach as possible. Because I mentioned right now, there's so many researchers, even just in accounting globally, that even every day, there are new things popping up. So yeah, just make sure you do that. That's really a best practice.
Yeah, thank you, Prof, for the answer. From this one, this row, any question? Okay.
Okay, thank you for giving me a chance to ask the questions. In the accounting curriculum or even in the conference, we have topic listed as tax, financial accounting, sustainability reporting. But when it comes to information system, why is it has to be combined with audit and information system? Because for me, it is two different expertise, considering that increasing topic of information system, both big data, artificial intelligence. Do you think that in the future it will be separated, become two courses? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the question. So yeah. So this specific information system, the reason why it's like that is because in the business school, at least in the U.S., there is already a separate information system department, right? Which has its own research, has its own journals and things like that. So that's why in accounting, it's and we do it to ourselves because it's the accounting information system section. They say that it has to be, it's AIS, right? Accounting information system, but it has to be big A and small is, right? So big A accounting, accounting matters most. So at least in speaking from being an editor of journal information system, what we're trying to do with the journal is we're trying to broaden that to where we can't be too narrow, where it has to be specifically an IT issue construct specifically for in the domain of accounting, because I think in the future, the scope of information system topics will be broader. And remember also, when you do information system research, there's also a whole stream of information system journals that you have opportunities to submit your work to as well, right? So like in my case, I have some of my AIS papers that are published in traditional IS journals because sometimes they're more open, right? But yes, the predominant thought in AIS is that you need to have an IS issue, whether it's big data or blockchain, artificial intelligence, and apply it to some type of an accounting problem or accounting setting, right? So we still have reviewers or editors that still want that, but perhaps in the future, that can get broadened, especially because we're seeing the application of IT to be much broader than just in accounting, right? In business organizations, right? So yeah, so your question is a question that's been asked a long time in AIS, right? But the answer is we want to try to differentiate AIS from just IS, right? So it's an IS issue, but it's applicable to like relevant accounting phenomena, basically, right? But you're right, it is unique to IS in accounting.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer too, Prof. Maybe we move to the Zoom. What the difference about contribution and implication of the result, and maybe we can elaborate with the next question
Okay,
about
let me.
the contribution. Maybe how to check the contribution. If we have a contribution or not. There is no any software yet.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah. So the first question: contribution of research and implication of research. To me, I don't know. To me, it's kind of a small difference. Both are important. Contribution of research. When I hear the word contribution, when most people hear the word contribution, it's more about contribution to the theory and academic research, right, literature, and how our study can also contribute to future researchers. So when we say contribution of research, most people immediately jump to future, but also from an academic literature standpoint. Implication of research is more about practicality of whether the research can be applied in real business settings. Unfortunately, in the business research discipline, it's not like we're in medical research or biological research or pharmaceutical research where the research is used to be applied to medicine, to real health, right? Our case is very, it's not as direct, right? So it's very, very rare that we have research that can be directly applicable to business practitioners. You know, it's funny. I once participated in a conference where it was unique because we presented an academic paper and the discussant was a business practitioner, right? So in that case, I had a chief information officer, because this was an IS study, that discussed the paper, and his first comment was, we cannot apply this paper to my company or business setting, right? So, but the good news is that when we try to publish our work, we're trying to sell our paper to fellow academics, right? So at least what we want to show, when I say business contribution or practical contribution, is to at least demonstrate how our study is at least relevant or informative to the decision making of real stakeholders, right? It's unlikely that they will use our research to do that, but at least we can inform. We just have to make our best case possible of how different stakeholders can potentially be informed and used at least for decision making, but not necessarily for implementation in real companies, because that's kind of hard to do even for accounting research, for most accounting research. But again, it doesn't mean that we can't try and make our case, right? That's all I'm trying to advance, is we have to get used to trying to be able to make our case about potentially how our research can be informative to all different stakeholders. Because if you think about it, most of our research in accounting can be informative to audit committee members, auditors, right? Because usually what we talk about in accounting are like, bad outcomes, right? Where the earnings management, fraud, audit quality, or bad audit quality. So at least we can inform, I feel, business practitioners about things that they should avoid, poor practices that they can, that should know about, at least things like that, right? But not necessarily things that they can directly implement, right? That's what I can say about that. The second question about yeah, this thing about originality or contribution of our paper. Yes, like I mentioned, there is no objective measure. There's no check. That's the difficulty. That's the frustrating part of this. Is what I believe to be original, what I believe to be interesting, what I believe to be a contribution may be different from Bu Yuli or Bu Desi's point of view, right? It's all subjective. That's why, because there's not a measure, what I try to do in my presentation is try to at least give you some thoughts or tools to help you make the best case possible. That's all we can do in our research paper, is make the best case possible for our contribution points, and not leave it up to the editor to assume what our contribution is, right? So in some ways, as researchers, we're not only researchers, but we're also trying to sell our research, our product. That's also an equal important point. Okay, and maybe that will change, because remember in the slides I said in the natural science research, they specifically instruct their reviewers to not evaluate manuscript based on contribution or significance. They only want reviewers to evaluate based on how the research was done, right? They let the market or future researchers determine whether it's important. If it's not important, it's not going to get cited. If it is important, it will. So, but as of right now, the best we can do is just make our best case possible. And that's kind of what I tried to convey earlier about hopefully those things, if you just try to implement, it can give you some ideas of how to best structure your contribution points.
Thank you, Prof, for the answer. And maybe our lecture juga always say in the class, you have to read, and read. It's the best way to check your contribution. Okay, Prof, maybe for this workshop today, I have the last question. Prof.
Okay.
I have prepared 5 questions, Prof, actually, but unfortunately, I just ask one question. Okay, based on your area of interest, Prof, maybe can you give us some insight about research in accounting information systems? I really like how to catch up the gap or new topic or issue, or what is important things in research or accounting information system, or about methodology, data, and yeah, what is the related with data analytics?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So this is the thing about information system, accounting information system. The topics, they change constantly, right? In terms of how it's important. Like what we talked, I remember in 2018 or 2019, I did a talk here. We been talking about topics of AIS. Those things are, almost not relevant right now, because at that time, because it's just constantly changing, right? That's number one. So right now, I can tell you that there's, in terms of topical standpoint, blockchain is a very hot issue right now, as more and more companies are implementing blockchain. At least in the US, companies not necessarily implementing blockchain, but they're doing R&D on blockchain and how that can be applicable. So as it relates to accounting, like for example with blockchain, it could significantly impact accounting or auditing procedures, because once you have, ledgers that are synchronous, it could potentially, create a more efficient accounting system when all parties have the same information, right? So in accounting information system, I know that's going on right now. I have a paper on blockchain also. And also another paper that I'm working on that is still new and emerging is kind of what I talked about, is how the implementation or the usage of technological tools in internal auditing or in audit tasks. It's very hard to get data because there's not archival data. So what we did is we went to real companies and surveyed how they use or implement data within the internal audit. And we are just basically examining how that yields, what are the costs and benefits of that. as it relates to effectiveness and efficiency of audit outcomes, right? So so that's also a new topic I think that will be in accounting information systems or accounting, is the level of usage or reliance of technological tools in audit procedures. How much of the auditing is automated? How much how much of the how much of the audit process is left to automation, artificial intelligence, and things like that? Because we see a lot of these audit firms, they use artificial intelligence to examine things that used to be using manual human labor, right? For example, checking contracts, lease contracts, right? There's now artificial intelligence to bypass that. So researching in how the usage or implementation of technology can change user roles in accounting departments and audit firms and things like that. I think that's still something that's worth exploring because there's not that much empirical data on that. And that's one of our contribution points that we try to sell to the editor for my own paper, is just there's not much empirical data. But there's a lot of debate. There's a lot of debate in the academic and business practitioners about whether there's a net benefit of technology usage in audit tasks, right? So anything we can do to move that forward, I think could be interesting, right? So those are two examples.
From many examples, Stefan. Yeah, thank you, Prof, for oh my God, for very insightful, Prof. Yeah. Okay, now before we close our session today, you want to take a picture? Sure, yeah. Maybe the camera will. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe Prof, we can.
But we need to.
Yes.
No.
Okay, I will. And for those who join, for all participants, please open your camera. We can take a picture together. Yes. Ya. Bisa buka kamera, Bapak Ibu, teman-teman semua. Kita akan mengambil gambar. Ini buat mahasiswa akan diabsen oleh ketua departemen. Ada resiko penilaian. Oh, salah ya, Bu. Oke. Iya, Bu. Tolong siapkan tempat untuk moderatornya. Salah ya? Mungkin mau cek dulu ya, Bapak Ibu. Mau cek dulu, cek posisi.
Oke, yang tengah aja.
Yang tengah ya, ini ya. Ini kali, biar kelihatan gitu. Nah, geser sedikit ke tempat, ke arah sini. Nah. Enggak. Oke ya. Yang on-site bisa melihat wajahnya di. Oke. Moderator ada tempatnya kan ya?
Satu, dua, tiga.
Sekali lagi, 1, 2.
Siap. Oke. 1, 2, 3.
Sekali lagi 1, 2, 3. Boleh kayak bebas 1, 2. Pakai kamera. Oke, gaya formal dulu. 1, 2, 3. Gaya bebas. 1, 2, 3. Ganti gaya. 1. Sarang neo. 1, 2. Penjam cakep, tahan kan sarang neonya. Oke. 1, 2, 3. Oke.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for all participants in Zoom. We will meet in another PPIA. Yay! Thank you for your information. Untuk yang mahasiswa S3, S2 yang belum pernah ikut PPIA, ayolah ke sini lah kapan-kapan ya. Ditunggu sama Ibu Yuli dan Ibu Desi. Terima kasih.
Prof. RC yang muncul ini.
MC-nya suara saja ya. Kita pengen lihat MC-nya. Dia jadi salib.
Izin live ya.
Ner Esri.
Ada.
Apa benar kita baku sedu?
Memang dikit.
Iya. Sampai dokter.
Ada
selalu sedu.